Yeah, so welcome to Steve Corbett. I'll let him introduce himself, and just want to hear, Steve, why you specifically are passionate about talking about the idea of material poverty and missions work. How did you get into this work? What's your bio, essentially?
Sure. Well, first of all, that brother in the front row with that banana is, I'm not supposed to cut it, but that looks like a really good banana, but it's gone now. You took care of that one pretty quick. Yeah, so actually I was in college. I was a brand new believer. I didn't grow up in a Christian background at all. Became a believer in my early 20s. Went to a Christian college, which I actually now teach at, called Covenant College. And they had a course there called Christ and Culture. And one of the books was Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger, which was by Ron Sider. And that's kind of the book of my generation. That was the call of what the scripture has to say about poverty and our responsibility to respond. And again, I'm a very young believer, so I'd never thought about this stuff. And so that was just incredibly convicting. It's interesting, the woman who became my wife was also in that class. And she is a daughter of a pastor, CRC, Reform, Dutch, all that stuff. But she had the exact same reaction that as a believer, you can't not care about the poor. That's just not an option. Now, there's a lot of different ways to respond to that, right? So we got married a year after I graduated, and a couple years after I read that book, and we ran into an organization that my wife was familiar with out in Arizona. I moved out there to be with her, got married. It was called Food for the Hungry, but they had a thing called the Hunger Corps, which is basically a Christian version of the Peace Corps, where you could go and serve for 2 to 3 years, kind of in the work. And so out we went, and we were in the Dominican Republic for a little bit, and then in southern Mexico in very rural farming, kind of subsistence farming communities. So we got to be right, got to be right in our face, got to be real people. And when you've watched people that you care about, and you see their journeys and how difficult they are, and especially with these subsistence farmers that they go out and grow a little bit of beans and some corn, and they were doing the same things their grandfathers were doing, their great grandfathers were doing, and most likely that's what their kids and grandkids are going to do. There was just no progress. And just to see in some ways the heroicness of just getting up early in the day. I'm from a farm background. I'm from Vermont originally, so I'm a dairy farm boy, so I get the farming thing. But just to get up, and some of these guys were walking an hour and a half just to get to their fields. Some had burros, some didn't. So some of the fathers would be out there with their teenage sons and 10-year-old, 12-year-old sons, and the father would hitch himself up to the plow, and the sons would run the plow, steer the plow, and they take turns, and then come at night, and they get up the next morning, just do that over and over. And and Sundays was the day you got drunk as a skunk, because you knew Monday was coming and it wasn't going to be any different. And I really just wow, just the tremendousness of that shouldn't be, right? Just the reality of the consequence of the fall. So that hit us pretty deeply. And so when we came back to the States, I ended up working with Food for the Hungry and got involved, and eventually became the director of training for the organization. And Food for the Hungry is a Christian relief and development agency. I know you guys are familiar with Compassion, obviously. So most of the staff are nationals working in their own context. I can believe we had 300 staff, and probably 2 or 3 weren't Bolivians. And so I got to see the church in action. I got to see my brothers and sisters ministering in their own context. And that deeply impacted me about, it's not about us running around the world. It's about us turning loose our brethren that are already in place who want to serve. And so for the last 20 years, I've been at Covenant College as a professor. We have a major in community development. So I've been teaching this stuff for 20 years. I think this next year is going to be my last year. I'm 67, I'm going to be 67. So I think this might be it, at least teaching full time. So I've just spent my life at different avenues of it. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, that's great context. And it would be interesting to hear when and why you decided to write When Helping Hurts. And then for those of us who aren't familiar with the book, can you just talk about some of the foundational?
Sure. So the why for the book was actually my co-author, Brian Ficker. he had started this thing called the Chalmers Center for Economic Development, which was basically just a place that you want to do research and then training for local churches and local ministries of how to help deal with poverty issues in their own context, especially from more of an economic development perspective. And so one of my co-workers was doing a course on microfinance, the savings-based approaches and small loans and all that stuff. And he realized, man, he had to do some foundational work first about what are we actually trying to do before you get into the actual intervention. And so he and I talked, and so I ended up putting together a course that was graduated, it was between 4 and 5 weeks, which was basically When Helping Hurts. And the trouble is, well, the good news was people really wanted to take that course. The problem was I was teaching full-time in this new major and couldn't meet the demand as well as I could. The ideal would be to have like 25 or 30 people in the course. I was having 100 to 150 people in the course. And so basically, it just wasn't the right thing. So Brian got the idea, hey, let's write a book and then everybody will leave us alone. And it basically, get rid of this kind of blockage here. So we did. So it was really Brian's idea. People haven't left us alone, but that's okay. But it was the reason for the book was incredibly practical. It's like, instead of taking the course here, just read the book and then go. We've learned that people don't like to just read a book and go. They want a little bit more along with that. So anyhow, that's the background of it, though.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love the practicality of it. But then obviously there's so many local contexts to apply this.
Yeah.
Can you share what if you had to share the thesis of the book, what would that be?
Wow. Okay. Wow. I'm not sure there's one. I think you do have to start with just the whole idea of what poverty, right? Because that kind of drives everything. And decades and decades ago, a guy, some of you guys may know the name Francis Schaeffer. He was a Swiss theologian, very impactful on me. I read a lot of his stuff when I was at Covenant as a student. He had written a little pamphlet, and buried in that was this idea of, God, the Trinity is one of the things that we know, but because of the Trinity is God by his inherent nature is relational. So it shouldn't surprise us as he created us in his image that we too have this kind of inherent relationalness. And so he drilled down into that, and that's where this whole idea of, we're kind of made to live in relationship with God, to know him, be known by him, right? We're supposed to actually live in right relationship with ourselves to understand. One of my mentors called us, we're the sacred rebels, right? Because we are precious and special because we're made in his image, but we're rebellious to the core, right? Because of the fall. We're just selfish little critters. Right relationship with others, which, the Philippians passage of consider one another's interests more important than your own. And so we should it's not about me, it's about others, and laying down your life for others and all that. And then finally, that whole idea of relationship with creation, which is both attending and caring, that sustainability piece, but also one of Francis Schaeffer's phrases was to create bounty, to take what is possible and make it real. And so, we've had sand forever. And eventually we figured, sand made mica, and eventually mica conducts electricity. It doesn't make a lot of heat. The next thing we have computer chips, right? And just, examples after examples of we're not meant to just, we're meant to be co-creators in that sense. And a lot of the work of community development is really about us acting out that co-creator thing of taking what's possible. Here's your land. Right now you're just subsistence, but there's some things you could do. There's some different seeding things, there's different techniques, there's different stuff. And you could actually go beyond just being a subsistence farmer, right? So anyhow, that whole kind of poverty is relationship stuff is probably the foundational thing. If you don't really grasp that, then it's hard to, if you just think poverty is lack of stuff, then the solution becomes just provide stuff. And we all know that's not the solution. The other thing I think that also comes out of that relationship model is the fact that this is not just for poor people. All of us have brokenness in our relationships. I'm not going to let my wife in on this webinar, this little talk, and I'm certainly not going to allow any of my 7 kids to show up because they'll find out how broken I've been as a father and a husband, right? So we all share that sense of we're on this journey, right? As Martin Luther said, we're all beggars before the cross. And there's an equality there that's really profound. Now, that doesn't mean that some of the effects of some of my brokenness are the same as the effect of people who are experiencing, tremendous poverty, whether that poverty is some of their own actions or just the systems doesn't work for them, whether there's oppression. I mean, there's all sorts of causality issues woven in that. But I think it's really important, especially one of my favorite authors is Jayakumar Christian. He's an Indian believer, has worked with World Vision most of his life. And he's the one who coined the phrase, the God complex of the non-poor, that we sometimes in the West play God. We've got all the answers. No, we don't. And one of the blessings I've had by traveling and working so much with believers around the world is to see the brokenness that my own culture has given me and become more aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked for a shelter in Cleveland for 4 years, and one of the things we were always trying to remember and explain to donors is people don't become poor when they run out of money. It's when they run out of relationships. And that context is a huge shift in how we can see these things. And it means that any of us could find ourselves in a situation experiencing poverty if we continue to tear down our relationships.
Sure.
So at the heart of it. So can you share?
Sure. I mean, even look, I was going to say, even looking at homelessness, the vast majority of people that are homeless, it's called conditional homelessness. It's not a temporary, it's not a permanent state. Something's happened to them and they were doing fine and now they're not, or they're on the edge and there just wasn't a lot of room and now they're, sleeping in their cars or whatever. And so, yeah, absolutely. And so even though we, with a lot of wealth, and I certainly have plenty of wealth, don't have to worry about that come crashing down. I need to be really empathetic for people who have much more of that edge. We won't probably, okay. Somewhere tonight, I want to talk about the cliff effect. So I'll probably call that a little bit later, but it's a really an important piece. Yeah,
you work that in wherever you see fit.
I'll probably forget, but I'll try somewhere.
Okay, we'll bring it up at the end if so. I think it'd be good for all of us in the room too to maybe lay a foundation from the American context of why somebody might find themselves experiencing material poverty. So it's broken relationships, but what are some of the other avenues to get there?
Well, okay, so all right. So I think we have to be really careful when we talked a little bit before we started. Yeah. We talked about that word relationship and we immediately go to interpersonal and we stop there. I'm in relationship with people all over the world through macroeconomics and, trade policies and everything, people I'll never meet, but they're affected by the choices I'm making and my nation's making and et cetera, et cetera. So I want to be really careful with that word relationship to not just bring it down to that. So, if we just talk in the US context, we know it's a mixed bag of things. Some of it, I would say this. Okay, I'll talk about the cliff effect right now. Okay, I'll jump into that. So, and I can send you a video that you guys would love. And there's actually a person from Colorado that's on one of the videos. And it's this idea of, what does it take to basically get out of having government benefits to being able to just pay for your bills off your own employment, right? So by the way, I don't use the word welfare a lot because welfare is simply something the government gives us that we don't earn. So the vast majority of my students have either Pell Grants or they're on work study. I mean, where in the world are you guaranteed a job? You show up at Covenant and you get work study and you're guaranteed work, So we have a lot of middle-class welfare. We have a lot of wealthy welfare, and we have low-income welfare. So anyhow, get that aside. But, to get off the benefits, I wish I had this video in front of me. I mean, so here's one example. If you go from like a woman who's, got a couple kids, one's in childcare, she earns $11 an hour. She gets a promotion or gets a raise to $11.50. She actually ends up with less at the end of the month because the benefits drop-offs don't match the rise in income well. So you're going along, you get a little bit of rise and oops, all of a sudden your childcare subsidy just tubes out. or your SNAP benefits just disappear. So they're not matched well. So so people can do, kind of work, just, do work and go get some education and get a livable wage job. So, this case of this one lady was at 11, for her to end up not to being where she was at $11 an hour, she had to get to be earning $19.50 an hour to be economically the same place she was when she was earning 11. That's quite a leap, right? There's a lot she'd have to do to get that. And we don't always appreciate our systems around us sometimes, and how difficult that can be. And we just think, people on welfare because they want to be and they're just lazy. Well, there's plenty that are like that. I mean, there's people like that, but that's not the majority of people that are getting government benefits. So in other words, the system is just not serving well, as well as maybe as it could. When you got the top 400 wealthiest people in America pay an average of 4% of income tax, that's a little off, right? So, yeah, well, and by the way, I'm a registered independent, so I'm not a Marxist over here, although I sound like it sometimes. I'm definitely, whatever. So anyhow, so a lot of it's the system. And I don't think we just blame the system, but just understand this is a tricky little thing. So you go in and your church wants to help this young lady who's come to your church and she's got a couple kids. Hey, just go get this job. I can help you get this job. And you get it, instead of making 10, you're going to make 13. You better make sure you've done you understand all that she has at $10 an hour and what's going to happen to her, because it may take her backwards. And would a young mother want to risk the life of her children for the 5 or 6 or 7 years it would take her to get $19 an hour? I wouldn't do it. Yeah. Right. So that's that one example. And then, we make our own decisions. I used to be a drug addict. I used to be a drug dealer. A lot of things, God pulled me out of a lot of stuff. And so, we do, things that sabotage our lives. So it's just a really mixed bag. I mean, you were talking earlier about one of the things you're thinking about is reaching out to schools, maybe to stand alongside schools, which I'm a big fan of. I often see that as an act of justice, not just an act of compassion, because you've got people who just don't have, and systems that don't have the means to really provide that kind of education that others can have. We homeschooled our kids until high school, and then we went to a local Christian high school that was very much a college prep school. And so that's why my wife and I give a lot of money to educational concerns, because we spend a lot of money on our own kids. And, we just believe we're in a place now where we can give back heartily, and we try and we seek to. So, I think just when when you encourage people to enter that, you're not just being a nice person, you're actually acting maybe against some injustices of systems that are at play. And I don't want to get too political and all that. It's just, that's a reality of things that are out there. We talked earlier about affordable housing, and some of what does it take to get a city to, encourage more affordable housing, and what can that look like? And, your church has got a lot of professionals in it, which means you have social capital at the wazoo. You're like a typical evangelical church. You're really powerful. You have a lot of powerful connections. I think I could get the mayor of Chattanooga, who I'm never going to meet, probably in 3 phone calls. And I'm nobody. I just know this guy who knows that guy who definitely knows that guy. And you guys are like that too. So you can actually help at different levels. And we in the church don't always think about that piece of social capital, and that is being relational, by using my privilege and positions and powers to help others who don't have the same access I do. And that's a great thing to be involved with. I don't think it's crazy. I don't think it's just leftist progressive stuff. I think it's something the church can do and do well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And as those are where the decisions are being made, like the church being willing to step in and have those conversations is so important.
Yeah, and I'm not telling the church to start, vote for this proposition and don't vote for that. No, I don't think from the pulpit you should be doing that. We should be having conversations and even classes saying, hey, let's talk about the issue of education here in Colorado Springs, and what are some of the what are some of the levers that if they could be pulled would make a big difference, and how could we speak into that as God's people?
Yeah.
Maybe not the church formal, but as God's people.
Yeah. How about on an individual level? You have these principles of relief, rehabilitation, and development. Can you take us through that? Because I think that
Sure.
model is extremely helpful.
Sure. So that whole spectrum comes out of answering one question: what's the cause of the situation? So it's all about causality. Why is this person in need, right? So I had a friend, and they're both high school grads. They got married fairly young, had about 4 kids pretty young, just kind of working. They decided, we're not going to provide for our, so they both decided to go back to school to become teachers, which is heroic of them. But in the middle of all that, their transmission of their one car blew up, right? So, they come to us as a church and go, our emergency fund isn't big enough for this. This was a $2,000 or $3,000, whatever it was. So that's a causality that says, okay, something's happened to you that's really fundamentally not your fault. All right. I mean, I don't like to quite use the word victim, but that's kind of what relief is about, is saying when people have had some senses of crisis or something happened to them, whether there are, they can be large scale, like the hurricane comes through or all those kinds of things, or the earthquake hits. They can be very small. The woman is living with a guy and she's with him because she wants a roof over her head for her kids. And when he gets drunk, he gets violent. And she was okay being the punching bag, but then he punched one of the kids. And this is a true story, by the way, in my town, and that she came to our church and said, help, so what do you do, right? And so we immediately got our safe shelter. We had a couple people who work for the sheriff's department. We're in a county, and right, so we figured out what we could do to make sure she was safe. And so that relief work is just like, man, somebody's been victimized. And the thing about relief work, it has to be immediate. And you better be there. You can't have, come back next week after we've had a session meeting, or the deacons have met, or what. No, you better have, that's why you have to have stuff in place beforehand, right? About what are we going to do when these kind of things happen. And that's relief work. And it's really important. It's really important work. Now, worldwide, there's a study that was been done decades ago that tried to look at cause. This is not in the US, but worldwide. And they came up with maybe about 10% of all poverty related issues are caused by some kind of crisis where relief would be the right response. So when it's needed, it's really important, but it's really not the normative part of our work. Now, when I worked full-time, we were a relief and development organization, right? So we had, certain people to do certain things and certain people to others. So that's kind of relief. Rehab is the idea of, and so the purpose of relief is just to stop the pain, whatever the pain is being caused by the problem. It's not to make their lives all better. It's not, all those kinds of things. That's kind of rehab. How can we get people back on their feet from the devastation that was caused? So whatever that might be. But most of our work is this last thing called development. And that's just, finding people where they're at and life's not working well for them. And, how can you stand with people to help them solve their issues? And so the key to development is and I know this sounds really PC language, but it's the word empowerment. It's helping people empowered. And all that simply means is people are growing in their ability to look at their situation, to make better decisions for a decision to enhance their future, and then be able to act on those decisions. And so our role in that can be way at the beginning of helping them analyze. So what do you think about this? What do you think would be, could help you with this? But maybe the person's got all that, but they've got to be the decider. You can't walk in and say, you need to do this and this and this and this and this. But maybe they make this decision, but okay, I would love to go back to school. I'll use that example again, but I got kids and I can't afford childcare. Well, maybe that's where we come in and remove that obstacle by maybe we help provide childcare. Maybe, a number of churches have childcare ministries. So the church could, provide low cost for this particular person that the church is working with or another church is working with or whatever. So it's removing those obstacles. That's typically where we come in with resources. And that's just an ongoing process, right? And so my favorite book is called Walking with the Poor. written by a guy named Bryant Myers at World Vision. I often call our book Walking with the Poor for Dummies. It's because we had a different audience. He was writing to people who are working internationally in the relief and development world. And so that was his audience. Our audience for our book was you guys. The person in the pew and the average church, God cares about the poor. I do too. What do I do? Well, how do I think about this stuff? So it's just a different audience.
Yeah.
So
when we encounter somebody in crisis, whether it's as a church body or we're out on the street even,
sure.
what are the first steps you would advise somebody to take when you encounter somebody in a crisis?
Well, there is no. Well, first is to determine, the best you can. Is this really a crisis, right? Is this the result of something that's happened that's unexpected, or you just can't pay your rent because you're not earning enough money and you're not budgeting well and all the different things, right? So you got to kind of get that. So in that little book that we've made for deacons, right, helping out in our church of benevolence, the first step is when they come is kind of make this diagnosis. Are they in this because something's happened that they really couldn't have prevented? Well, then you go a certain pathway. If it's not that, then there's kind of a different pathway about what can we dig into this to kind of solve this on I hate the word, I don't use the word permanent because things go up and things go down, but at least let's dig into the deeper things. That means the person's going to be willing to do that. And so our diaconate, when we made a lot of changes about 20 years ago, we found that initially only about 10% of the people that came to us that didn't have crises wanted to do anything about it. They just wanted us to help with their bill, right? That's changed. Our reputation is a little bit different. And so we tend to get, but it's 20 or 30%. And the rest of the people are like, you're not gonna pay my bill? Well, I'll just go somewhere else. And that's fine. You say, God bless you. And on you go and whatever. And because there's this whole thing in development about the whole idea of being ready, change. And that's a whole nother subject, details around it. But unless a person seizes a problem and sees that they have a role in solving the problem, you really can't help people very easily. So unfortunately, two of my youngest kids, one just got out of alcohol rehab Friday after 30 days and never had trouble in the past, but and then my youngest daughter, same thing. She's in rehab right now for alcohol. And so it's really kind of, we're not a big heavy drinking anyhow. So, both of them were able to say, I got problems and I want to do something about that. So we're able to walk with them versus, don't you think you should do this? Don't you think you should do that? So we're thankful that there's an openness to them owning it and wanting to be different.
Yeah.
But that's not there, guys. I think we're bad stewards and we spend too much of our time. Or our resources on helping people who really aren't looking for change.
Yeah.
When it's not a crisis, right?
Yeah. So it's not a perfect science. There's no.
This is an art. This is an art. I would say development is as much an art as a science. This whole idea of relief, rehab, and development. When we first wrote the book, we get so many emails. How do I know when I go from one stage to that? Well, these are incredibly permeable boundaries, to say the least. It's mucky. It's all get out. So so we have to be careful with that, and I'm okay with that because ultimately we need the discernment of the Holy Spirit to guide us into what's the best way to give testimony that He loves them.
Yeah. Looking at who we are in this story, I think you mentioned earlier, it's really easy to say like, okay, yes, we're going to jump in, have this God complex, like we can save everything. How should we actually have a right view of ourselves when we are helping with benevolence?
Well, I think if you've never been poor yourself or don't know poor people, how do you know what's the right track for them? And that's one of the biggest things is just becoming a learner about something as simple as a cliff effect, right? And so my co-author Brian shares a story. So in his neighborhood, this guy he was kind of semi-homeless. He'd kind of live and he'd be around and they got to know him and liked him and everything. And he was having trouble with his benefits, his health benefits. So Brian, who's a PhD in economics from Yale, said, well, no problem. I'll go with you. He said, I spent 2 hours in that office and I walked out I didn't have one clue any more than I did 2 hours earlier. He says, I'm not even sure the staff person knew. I mean, it's complicated, right? And so just understanding sometimes that it's not, I mean, the blessing of our nation is we have a lot of options and a lot of systems for help. They're not always the easiest to navigate. And so I think part is just listening to people about that a little bit and not quickly label them as, you know, you just don't care or you're trying to con me or whatever. But that takes some time, right? And that's going to get to a later question you have too. But just trying to you know, appreciate that. One of my daughters worked for 10 years with an organization called Chattanooga Room with the Inn, which works with homeless women who have children. And one of the stats that she learned is that 85% of women that are homeless in America have experienced trauma before the age of 12, and about 80 to 90% of that is sexual trauma before the age of 12. So this whole idea of trauma-informed care, so they've been traumatized, and then their way of coping with that and what your brain does to get through that, when you take those coping skills into adulthood, it does not work well. And so my daughter, Janelle, her job was kind of the child advocate, and she used to get so mad at these mothers. Don't you love your child? But she realized if I had met that woman who's now 22 with 3 kids by 2 men, and whatever the story is, if I'd met her at 8 years old and has been constantly raped by her uncle, I just put my arms around that girl and just love on her. She said, I had to start realizing that 22-year-old was really that 8-year-old girl. That doesn't mean you don't hold them accountable, you don't help them try to change, but realize, wow, their story is so different than mine. I can't come in with my set of values and just place it on you and say it worked for me, it should work for you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Coming in from a place of trying to learn and understand versus just saying, okay, I've got the answers, follow
Right.
me. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Because when people have experienced trauma, when they get to adults, suggestions often come across as commands, and commands come across as control. And for them, when they were younger, they didn't have control. Because they didn't have control, they got really hurt. So often, it's like you have this meeting, they're nodding their head, yep, they seem really compliant, but they don't come back to the next meeting. Because for whatever reason in their brains, this part of their brain that senses danger actually gets physically bigger. I mean, they've done a lot of brain science stuff that's just amazing. They're just wired differently, and so they see danger when most people that haven't been traumatized wouldn't, but it's real to them. And so, okay, maybe I got to be careful with maybe you should think about this, or you should do this, or and because that could scare people away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that does move us to the $1 million question that I was hoping you would help us answer. I think a lot of us want to jump in and volunteer or be more present to our neighbors or X, Y, and Z, but
Right.
we're so overwhelmed by the busyness of our work, our family lives, our service to our own church, that it feels difficult to even fit in helping somebody who's in a crisis or who needs the development part even, or just to show up to volunteer. How would you encourage us to step in to service in this way?
So the idiot part of me would go, let's change all of the American culture and system, but that's not me. Hey, we live in it, right? Highly individualized, anyhow, all that stuff, right? So I get it. You're where you are. And so I would say 2 things. One, and I mentioned this, Caroline, before we started, working with college students over the last 20 years, I've realized there's a lie out there that writing a check is somehow a cop-out to really getting your hands dirty and doing the real work, real relational, whatever that is, right? And I think that's a bunch of crap. I was telling Caroline, the majority of ways we help with poverty, Mary and I, is we write checks to groups that we vetted, that we think are doing really good work. And some of them are local and some are international. We've been blessed to work international so much. We've got, a lot of, relationships that we can lean into. And if your church, you're a lot of 20s, 30s, you're professionals, just helping people think about in their budgets, where are they becoming, setting aside more and not just to pursue the American dream and the travel team, soccer team for their kids, which they got to have, or they'll never get to college on a scholarship, all that crap, all that stuff we followed too. I did too. I had 7 kids, man. I was coaching 4 of my kids in baseball one year. I mean, I get that overwhelming too much stuff, but you know, we have resources to spare. We really do. You know, as an aside, Mary and I, we buy $2,000 cars. That's all we've ever done. Now, if we need 3 cars, we usually have 4 because one of them's not going to be working some days, right? So, but we got a friend who's a mechanic, and you know, and it has a longer story, but we just, that's what we do, and we've never had a, you know, we get a car with 120,000 miles on it, get 100,000 miles out of it, don't pay a lot of money for it, and get rid of it for scrap when it's done, and get another one. And so, yeah, so there's ways you can, I'm not saying you can be like us, but there's plenty of ways to find more if you want, if you really want to. And so I think just find organizations like, for example, in Colorado Springs that you think are doing good work and support them financially. And I tend to be more of, rather than finding 5 and giving a little bit to each, find that 1 or 2 and really stand with them, right? Because that steady donor money that comes in is so important. Having worked for a nonprofit most of my life, you can't plan unless you know what your budget's going to be. And so, yes, the little grant can come and go. That's big money, but that comes for 2 or 3 years and it's gone. It's that steady thing that you can build staff around and programs around. So I would look for those, you know, whatever those things are. You know, yeah. I mean, even, you know, like the classic thing, you want to get involved at school, I will help bring tutors. Well, that's great. But what if you paid one of the teachers who needs some more income to lead that and to teach others how to tutor well and pay that person, right? They already got the relationships. They know the institution. They know the kids. You know, my daughter and son-in-law, one of my daughter's son-in-law are first grade teachers in inner city Memphis, you know, really rough schools. And they know so much more than anybody else about what needs to be done with those kids, right? So what does it mean to stand with some of those teachers that are already there? And you're not going to know until you go talk to them. Don't come up with your plan. Go talk to them about what the school needs. And they'll tell you. And then you have to figure out what you can do, what you can't do, right? So anyhow, I think that's one thing. I mean, there's no excuse for as wealthy as we are as a church not to be giving. When it comes to giving of yourself, that gets weight. I get it. You know, these development relationships can be really long-term. I would say this, most of the research says, make sure you do it as a team of people. You know, if you're going to try to help this one young woman who's trying to, you know, improve her life, you need 4 or 5 people. Maybe one person is that person who'll just drive that lady to whatever meeting she has to go to. I mean, my dad wouldn't talk to anybody, but he'd drive anybody anywhere. You need somebody on your team. That's what they want to do, right? You don't all have to be the 5 people who want to pour your life into them and be their counselor and all that. Another, whatever the things are, right? And so divide up the work. And this is in that book on benevolence a little bit about the worst thing you can do with a volunteer is not tell them when they can stop, right? This is the same with small groups. All it says is small groups fail because they don't start with knowing the end date. And over time, they're just going to eventually, everyone's going to pitter out. So say we're going to do this for 1 year. So we did 1 year, small group. And at the end of the year, then you can sign back up, or you can change groups, or you can take a break from groups, whatever. You really need to do that with people who are giving of their time, right? It's a defined thing. So that's, you guys as leaders need to be doing that. So people don't feel like they're trapped in it and they can't get out of it. And they're horrible people if they stop and all of that kind of stuff. And a lot of it's just going to be helping people navigate the systems that are there. We sometimes as a church really suck at using what's already there. Yeah. Oh, that's the government, and the government's, you know, whatever. So, and we want our own little version of it. No, we can just be great lights. And in those informal conversations, we can be sharing the truth of the gospel. But still be seeing with social workers that are helping them understand how to get this benefit or that benefit or whatever needs to be done. But it needs to be a team, or you're going to get, people are just going to get burned out. It always happens.
That's great advice. Yeah. I think the permission to think creatively, but work within systems, work as a team is really helpful. And
yeah.
Yeah,
So-
don't be ashamed of giving only.
Yeah, so in that, I'm going back to that book again, I'm sorry. I mean, we really made that as a workbook, for the church and not it's not theoretical at all. So it's a lot of it here. Here's a practical thing here, here's a practical thing here. And one of those is this action plan. I just love it. It's kind of an asset-based action plan. It starts out with, where do you want to be in 3 months? And okay, what could you do to get there? And who in your circles can help you get there? And it's not until towards the end, okay, now what can we do to help with this, right? So you've really made and if they won't do that first work, then you have nothing to say. And then when it comes down to yes, and we might have some people that are, volunteer, whatever term you want to use, don't use the word mentor, but champions or coaches, whatever term you want to use. This one of my favorite organizations out of Pennsylvania, come out of the Anabaptist movement. They just call themselves neighbors. We're just trying to be good neighbors. That's all. Anyhow, and say, okay, they'll commit to 6 months. You get 6 months, and that's it. We're not, if you turn into lifelong friends with one of them, that's fine, but that's not what we're doing here. We got a 6-month thing going here. Here's a chance. And at the end of 6 months, if we, walk away, all the volunteers walk away, they're not walking away. They fulfill their commitment, and good for them. Well done, good and faithful servant, and move on. So I think you guys have to very careful with that. So people aren't so afraid they're going to get trapped that they won't do anything.
Yeah.
I totally get that. And we got to get beyond just hey, let's go on a Saturday morning and go, rake leaves in the neighborhood, type things or whatever it might be. We can do better than that, but that doesn't mean we have to have our lives eaten up.
Right. That's awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to ask you one more question. He's 2 hours ahead of us, so it's very kind of him to be
But I
here.
also go to bed about 2 in.the morning, so I'm I'm in my sweet spot. So don't worry about me.
Well, I guess we can stay here for a while.
Well, it's up to I'm fine. So,
Well,
but you guys, I think whatever works for you.
yeah, we're gonna open it up for questions, but before I do, I just want to ask, intellectually or practically, if somebody is like, oh, I really want to dig into this topic, where do you think that it should start?
Well, I mean, this sounds like the salesman. You really ought to take a quick look at When Helping Hurts. I mean, it's a super simple book. I always tell people, if you're having trouble sleeping, start reading it. You'll be sound asleep. It's better than melatonin or Ambien. It's a very accessible thing for you guys to have read it, right? Now, doing it is complex as all get out, and there's no book that's going to help you figure all that out. But I would start there. Another book is if you're looking for conviction, it's Toxic Charity by Robert Letman, who's down in Atlanta. So Robert, he's now like 75. So he wrote this book maybe 10 years ago. He basically wrote it when he no longer needed funders anymore to fund his ministry. So he finally said what he's been wanting to say for 50 years. So it's get ready. He's going to pin your ears back once in a while. But that's a good also one. But outside of that, I think it really depends on what you guys want to lean into. And there's just, so many good things to find different ways to learn. And Caroline, I mean, I'm just going to offer this. If you guys like start to lean into something, if I know of, some organizations that have good ideas and around that, I will point you in those directions. There is one national organization called Neighbor Works, which is really good, and offers a lot of good stuff. One of their specialties is helping, because they're very much on the community end of community development, about not just helping individual families, but helping neighborhoods see improvement, which means you need neighborhood leadership. And so they are big on investing in people in the neighborhoods to be leaders. And they do an amazing job, but that's another different avenue.
Yeah, I've never heard of that, so I'll have to check them out. Cool. Great. Well, thank you for all of that. Does anybody else have questions? Heather?
I kind of have two. So the first being,
I have one question. So right now, it looks like the sun has risen in your room.
Yes.
Whatever that bright white light is, I don't know if God's calling me home right now or what, but I can't see anybody, which I could when we started. So maybe that's okay, but.
Need to face me. It can go that way.
There, almost. Yeah, I can see my brother in the front row again. And yes, I can see you three in the front row. So that's good.
okay. So I kind of have two questions. My first is recommendations for vetting organizations to work with. And then the second being, what do you recommend for people who want to serve as a family, like, especially if they have young kids?
Right, right. So I purposely don't recommend organizations because I'll forget somebody, or I'll tell you to go to this organization and you go to the local branch of them and they suck, even though the organization's great, right? You know what I mean? I feel very comfortable recommending Habitat almost anywhere, but I also know Habitat has its variances, but that's a great way. As far as kids are concerned, Mary did this when we first moved here. She volunteered every week at the local, it's called Chattanooga Community Kitchen, which started, it's kind of a place for meals. And what they basically did, they just needed them. Mary spent a lot of time in their closets organizing their canned donation goods, right? But my kids were there, the 2 or 3 youngest, and they met a lot of homeless people, and they were wonderful. And so their view of homeless people is really different, even some of my older ones. So don't be afraid of that. At the feeding center, not serve it, we'd eat it. Because we were donating to the organization, so we weren't worried about that. We were taking things away, and we would just sit with people that are homeless and just have supper with them, and they and hear their stories. And many of them wanted to hear our stories, and do that. I know you guys are doing something with a shelter of some sort, homeless. Get away from just serving that stuff. Get on the other side and sit down and be people with other people, right? Yeah. So I think just those kinds of things, as far as like, and so they can meet real people in real life situations and start to understand these are nice people that might have some harder things in life that they might not fully understand, but they think, hey, that guy's really funny and he tells good jokes and he was nice to me, And so that's what I would encourage. If you're going to tutor, bring your little kids along. And if you got older kids, you've got teenagers, my goodness, they make better tutors than you and I, because they they know how to turn on things and whatever, right? So don't just, and I get it. I'm not, so a lot of my kids have played sports, or they've been in drama and all that, but we would make sure that part of their time was volunteering. That's just part of your life. It's not gonna just be everything's about you. And I had some pretty talented kids that could do a lot of things, and we actually didn't push that so that they had more space to give to others. And as they're adults now, for a lot of them, I think that was a good thing. So I don't know if that helps. That may sound a little vague, but just don't be afraid to bring them along.
Yeah, awesome.
You don't need to take, if you guys have read my book, I'm not the most excited person about short-term missions. You don't need to take your teenage kids and take 15 of them or 20 of them and send them somewhere for a week to open their eyes. You can do a better job just with your lifestyle in your own community, and it'll have much more of a lasting effect. Because the problem with these mission trips is the stats all show that for 90+% of people, it doesn't change your life one single bit. They go out, they have a little high, they come back and but 6 months later, they're right back to where they were. So is that really good stewardship of the church's resources and people's time? So I think we can do better.
Yeah, great questions to ask. Other people? Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on giving money to homeless?
Yeah, don't do it. As a rule, don't do it. But you should know 2 things. You should know that the address, contact information, and the basic programs of your local homeless shelters, right? So go to them. They probably have all that on a card, and you should have that. You should have the phone number memorized, a contact person. And so that when you find somebody, you refer them there. I take people all the time if they'll get in my car. Now I'm a big old guy, and so so you younger, I don't let my daughters do this, but and just point them in, point them in the direction. And going and buying them a meal, okay, if you sit down and eat with them, then it's not about the food, it's about the interactions a little bit, but don't sit there and pepper them with 4,000 questions. Just be a nice person sharing a meal. But there's this thing called the substitution effect. By the fact that you fed them a little bit, maybe that means they have more money to use it. And, if they're struggling with addictions, for example, or whatever, can go in those directions. And we know in America, the stats, like they change, but I think it's around 60% of homeless in America have some degree of mental issues, and about half have addiction issues. And those are so deeply intertwined, right? And so getting them to go to places and connect with places that know how to work with them. We have an organization in town called Arise. All they do is work with the mentally ill homeless. That's them, and they help them get jobs. They help them get a stable housing. They have counseling for their addiction issues and their mental illness issues, and blah 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 blah. That's a way more valuable than you giving somebody $5 on the streets.
Right.
Now, I have sometimes given money because I felt God told me to, but it's pretty rare. I've got some stories around that, but that's not the norm. And I never feel guilty doing that, saying no, but have you heard of this? Or can I take you there? Or whatever it might be. So first of all, so you guys in your group, your outreach, whatever you call yourself, missions and outreach, somebody on you need to get all that information together and make it really accessible to people in your church.
We have some printouts maybe left over. We did that at one point, but we should stock up again. Yeah, thanks.
I mean, I remember like some handout bags that had.
Yeah.
stuff in it.
And those
Yeah.
had the cards in there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always stumped, like, what do I do driving down the road and there are people in the corner asking for money? Do I just ignore them or do I need to do something?
No, okay, so no. So sometimes yes, because you don't want to start a traffic jam. I always roll down my window and say hi. Because they're human beings, for crying out loud. And I'm not going to presuppose, and most of them don't give a rip that I say hi, but for a lot of them, they're startled. And I often start with, hey, I'm not going to give you anything, but hi, and I wish you well, but this idea of like, I'm not going to give them money, so I don't want to look at them. Oh, come on.
Right.
Grow up. How's that for being gentle? No, I mean, just come on, treat them, they're human beings, right? Yeah, they got their stories and who knows what, it's all there. And there's probably a lot of hard things in their lives that put them where they are. Yes, there's some scam artists. I used to be a scam artist because I could lie with the best of them back in the day. That's one of the things God had to really work on me with, is not, not lying so much just to get things. And yeah, that happens, but I don't think that's the majority of people. And even if it is, you can still say hi to them and wish them well, whatever that means. You get your own idea of what wellness means, and go on your day.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Other questions?
My cat is playing with the side of my laptop. So if all of a sudden you see this furry head show up.
That's working on me. Yeah.
I
Anything?
have a quick question.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about so many positive things tonight, and that's great. The book is When Helping Hurts. And I think there's probably a lot of things that we do unconsciously as a church, probably. So what are some tendencies that you maybe see churches doing? We're pretty much a blank slate. We're just getting into some of this stuff as a church. We're pretty new.
Sure.
What are some of the tendencies that you see churches doing that, like, they're meaning well, but it's actually not helpful? So what are some tendencies to avoid that you see?
Yeah. So the biggest one is pretty simple. The biggest one is doing relief work when that's not the context. So having a food pantry, having a clothing pantry, having all that's, and just paying an electric bill just out of, just to help, because somebody asked to help you pay the electric bill, and because you want to show Jesus's love. You're not showing Jesus's love. You're not helping that person at all. And so just don't do that. Just don't be afraid not to do that. Now, so like our local church, when we first went there, had all that stuff, pantry, and then we found out I'm in North Georgia, by the way, rural North Georgia now. But in the little county seat, there was an organization that, worked with low-income folks and had a good food pantry and had a clothing pantry and all that kind of stuff. So we just started encouraging our folks not only to donate their stuff, but more importantly, out of our deacons fund, we fund that place because we want them to succeed. And so because they, if they do it really well, they make sure they're not creating dependency. They're making sure they're not being bad stewards of the resources God's given them by just giving it to people because they've asked for it, and that kind of stuff. So I think the biggest thing is don't get sucked down the relief path, which is kind of that one-off thing when it's not really a crisis type things. That's probably the biggest thing. So then I say, okay, so that's the biggest, don't do that. Don't feel guilty to say no to someone. If you're offering them something that's really helpful to them, but they just don't want it, they have a right to say, no, I don't want that. But that's their decision, and don't let that be guilt for you. If that makes sense. What else not say no to, not to do? Yeah, as I said earlier, that God complex of the non-poor, don't pretend that you know what it's like to be poor in America and that you can figure out their life story. You can figure it out for them by bringing your background and your sets of experiences to bear on people that can be in some different situations. I'm not saying that we don't have things to share. Don't mishear me here at all, but sometimes it's more complicated.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Good. Great. Other thoughts, questions? Wow, we are right on time. So good job, everybody. Steve, thank you so much.
Why'd you tell me we were going to go to 10 o'clock?
Yeah.
You roped me in for an hour. I was like, man, these guys are committed to do an hour and a half. Holy smokes. Now I get it. All right.
Better to be under time than over, right?
No, that's right. Hey, all good if you want to do a good training or a good sermon, you just finish earlier than you tell people you're going to finish, and it's automatically good.
Yeah. Love it. That's awesome. Well, any final closing thoughts from you as we go on and try to serve well?
Yeah, you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. Don't feel guilty about what you're not doing. Lean into what you can do, but lean into it, because some people have read the book and taken the wrong, don't want to hurt, so I better not do anything because I might hurt them. But that's not the purpose. The purpose is to do more, not less. Just is to do more of the right things. And it sounds like you've got some real options right in front of you. I would encourage whoever's involved with that, with the homeless ministry that's feeding them, go talk to them and say, hey, we'd like to have a night once a month or once every couple months where you don't take 20 of you guys, or just on some kind of rotating basis. We're just going to come eat. And, they have a vigil once a year here in Chattanooga. That's I think it's a national thing. It's the day of mourning for those who've died while they're homeless. And so this Chattanooga room in the end, they know people. And so that we pray for those people who've died in this past year that they know of, and just going there and being part of that. And there's tons of homeless people that this is their friends or whatever, or something, it's just a powerful way of standing in people's pain, with people in their pain. So yeah, but just, start doing what you can, and let it build over time. Don't spend forever planning. That doesn't mean you just jump into things willy-nilly, but and don't guilt your congregation members who feel like I don't have any room to breathe in my life. That's a discipleship issue. That's for your wider church of just what should life look like as far as how we spend our time. And your job is your committee and others that are attracted to you is to say, here's options for you when you're ready.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much. This is incredibly helpful. Oh, Andy.
Maybe got another question.
Oh, here it comes.
Just kind of sparked another thought. Thanks for your time, Steve. The location of our church is downtown, and we have a lot of people experiencing homelessness. Like we drive right past there. Sometimes, very rarely, occasionally wander into our church just to get a cup of coffee or whatever. Not so much not as much as it could happen, I guess. What could our church do, either by training its members or by the way we position ourselves to feel like it's a place that they could come in for a relationship and not feel weird, or I don't know.
Yeah, so don't presuppose they actually want a relationship with you. We're not all that, right? I mean, we just make it available, everyone come flocking because they just want to be loved. Not that might not happen, but again, I can just go back to find out who's doing really good ministry to that population and stand with them really strongly. And then ask the question, yeah, is there other things our church can do? So we have some friends that, well, there's a local church that had to leave and move, and they had to do it really quickly. So they end up buying this place, and it's right 1 block from the center of homelessness in Chattanooga. So everybody's going, oh, what a wonderful church has gone to minister to the homeless by going and starting the church there. And the church leaders are going, no, we were going to get kicked out and we needed to find a place. But now that they're there, like you guys, they're like, oh, wow, we need to be more engaging with the systems that are here. They have a kind of an open spot that people can kind of come into without wandering off through the church. And there's, like you said, there's coffee there, type of things. Sometimes I think they have some refreshments and stuff, and they usually have, a few people hanging around. And so, and the homeless kind of know that. They don't all go running over there, but they kind of know there's a place there. There's another church that's really nearby, and this might not be the right thing for you guys. They converted a couple of their classrooms into showers because the homeless often don't have good access to showers. Our local college, I don't know what school it's in, community, no, is it? No, it wasn't the community college, but yeah, one of the things that homeless people need is foot care. So, maybe you can hire somebody to come in and do some pedicure work, once a month for homeless, and have it at your church. Say, hey, come on in. We're doing dental checkups. There's a local dentist who does dental checkups for the homeless on a regular basis. And another group, and the one that does the podiatrist, they're actually podiatrists. They're actually kids in school that are learning this, and so. So make your church a place that hosts those kinds of things, right? And not be afraid that your carpet's going to get dirty or whatever.
It's rented space in here.
There you go. So yeah, we all know we underuse our buildings, and so don't be afraid of that a little bit. Yeah, you gotta be smart, right? Let's not be stupid and all that. But there may be some practical ways that on a periodic basis that your church could actually be a place that homeless come into because you're offering something they really want. And it's out of that maybe these other things happen, these conversations happen, and maybe some relationships start. Maybe they don't. Or you go and you eat with them too. And so you just get to know them as people. Why should homeless people open up to us any quicker than we'd open up to a stranger? And I think that's part of our God complex, that somehow we think people want to be in relationship with us. And if we reverse the circle, turned it around, we probably wouldn't be as quick to embrace on the other person. So does that help, Andy?
Yeah, thanks.
Some small things, talk about, there's probably some resources around there that could be helpful.
Yeah, great, good question. Thanks. Cool. All right, well, we'll let you go, Steve, and we have a couple books from One Helping Hearts. If anybody's interested in purchasing one, there's some on the book cart. You can make a donation, or we can order more as a church. So just connect with Cole, I think, if you want to do that. But we so appreciate you, Steve, and all the work that you're doing to
Sure. And Caroline, I'm going to offer this to you because you've been kind of the point person. If your group comes up or other people in your church, you got more questions, don't be afraid to get hold of me.
Okay.
If I can't get to it, I will tell you that, but if I can, I will.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you for being open to that. And
I will tell you up front, you're going to don't text me, but you can email me, but you probably have to email me 15 times. So I love to be bugged, because you have to be bugged. If I'm not bugged, my inbox is this enormous every day. So I want the squeaky wheel. You're doing me a favor by
bothering you.
coming back and saying, hey, remember you said this and this is an issue. So I really appreciate that, actually.
That's great. Yeah, can do. I hate texting too, so we'll be email buddies. Sweet.
There you go.
Great. Well, thank you, and I hope you have a nice 4 hours until you go to bed.
I'm reading a pretty good book right now from the guy who wrote all the Born Identities. I like those books, and so I'm in the middle of one right now, so that's good. I never get to read for pleasure during the school year because I'm a professor, so my summer is full of mindless reading.
That's awesome. Good. You deserve it. Well, all right. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, blessings to all of you.